Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X-Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X-Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X-Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X-Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
Welcome to another edition of Cal's Corner Radio here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Folks, as you know, and I say this in every episode because it's true, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal. That's the mission, if you will, of this show. And of course, that's a lot of subjects. In fact, there's nothing I know of that's off limits. Tonight we're going to talk about politics, global politics, politics that impacts all of anybody listening to this, no matter where they are geographically in this world. Literally, it does affect them, but in ways that a lot of people, most people listening to this, just remain ignorant of, hopefully until they listen to this show. And what we're going to talk about is the global threat of Communist China. Communist China is back in the news because yet another one of their seeming spies has been busted. Now, I have to say seeming because all the evidence is not in yet, but let me put it to you this way. What kind of person who is from China, who ends up at the Mar-a-Lago resort that President Trump owns — this would be American President Donald Trump, of course. I don't know of any other Trumps that are in the news other than him, pretty much, other than his family, of course. And, of course, he goes there frequently, and it is at taxpayer expense. He, of course, gets money from that, let's be honest. He gets accused of double dipping in that sense, but he likes to spend his so-called vacations there or his away time from the White House, and he has the right to do that. And because the American system is so perfect in dealing with potential ways to earn money once you're in power in the government, he, of course, is doing that, and, of course, he's already wealthy as it is. He's a billionaire. But rather than go down that tangent, and why one can argue that it's a bit of a conflict of interest in allowing him to stay there in the first place, whenever he goes anywhere, that's the whole reason of bringing this up, Mar-a-Lago being just one example, because it is frequently visited by Trump because he owns it. And again, I argue because it's not lost in him that he makes some extra rather expensive coin on the side because of his trips there, just inherent in the dynamics of needing to protect the president, book the rooms for the Secret Services there, et cetera, et cetera. After all, he can't be by himself. You know the game. Anyway, the point is that they found a woman who slipped through security. She was a Chinese national, and she had with her a pen drive or thumb drive with some malware on it. And she appears to have had some computers, and she was apparently going to be spying. That's what they're investigating. And China, not coincidentally, at the trade negotiations with the U.S., has finally admitted, according to U.S. trade representatives, that there is indeed a problem with them stealing intellectual property, or what's called IP. Well, no kidding, duh. It's about time that that issue be raised, and I do applaud President Trump for raising that issue. I condemn other politicians, including prior presidents, for not doing enough to stop China on that front, since it was a slam dunk open and shut case. But China spying on the U.S. has brought open to the issue, at least in the arena of public discussion, once again, the fact that China does spy. In fact, China spies more against the West and Western interests collectively. This would include European interests as well, than even Russia does. And this is a historic fact. It is beyond dispute. And Russia, of course, does it full time, beyond 24/7. But China does it even more. They're institutionalized for it. Because a key ingredient to make China successful at the rapid pace that they have grown and have become successful, a global economic power, let's be honest, give them their credit where it's due, they've been able to do it by aping, copying, and ripping off the West. And let's be blunt, that's exactly what has happened. In China today, if you want to open up a business, let's say I invented something, and I want it manufactured over there, well, I have to turn over that intellectual property to a state-sanctioned entity. I have no choice. And guess what happens once it is in the hands of that state-sanctioned entity? It ends up in the hands of the Communist Party. And it goes to a special division within the Chinese military in the intelligence wing, whose job is to look at anything that might be of military value. And if it is decided to be of military value, they're going to copy it. Now, what you can do is you can actually do a simple search on key military inventions. You will find that China is right behind the West within a few years because they've essentially ripped off the West. They stole, for example, the engineering blueprints to the Joint Strike Fighter. So today China flies, still testing, shaking down, its own homegrown, ripped-off version of the American Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35. Why? Because they're able to make it faster and quicker than if they had tried to invent it all on their own, because they managed to steal the blueprints, and they stole it during the Obama administration. An Inspector General report studying the issue of the lack of cybersecurity and the extremely slow and underprepared, underwhelming response to it by the U.S. intelligence community and the Pentagon as a whole was blistering against the Obama administration for taking U.S. competency to new lows in that arena. Trump has tried to fix it, but let's be honest, with about half the government positions still open, no matter how competent any president would be, you're not going to get as much done as you could when about half your vacancies remain open. And that, by the way, is about in the State Department alone. Now, a lot of extra money is being put into cybersecurity, beefing it up. It's a huge growing market. It's always going to be, especially now that so-called blockchain security elements like that are epitomized by entities like Bitcoin, they've been hacked. And who has been hacking them? Communist China, North Korea, with considerable Chinese help, because they are a puppet regime of Communist China, let's be blunt, and of course Russia, and Iran is in there too. And it is Iran and North Korea that were even counterfeiting American $100 bills. Americans may have noticed that over the past few years, the $100 bill has changed. It has been equipped with a hologram stripe. The reason why is because for years, those two countries, because they were under sanctions, and plus they love doing this to the West, harming it, in other words, they were taking the $1 bills, taking the ink off of it. Therefore, they had the unique paper. Then they re-stamped them or reprinted them as Ben Franklin's $100 notes, the old school notes, and they flooded the market with these, used who knows how much. U.S. government picked up on it. they then changed the currency. And this is a true story. And this kind of skullduggery goes on. Now it continues in the form of digital currency mining, and North Korea is a master of it. So communist China is a threat not only to the U.S., and one might say, well, it's understandable that China would spy on the world's only superpower, the United States of America, would spy on Canada because of the close relationship between Canada and the United States. It is still very close, despite the friction between, the two leaders, Trudeau and, of course, Donald Trump. But it is still very close, far more close than, distant. Canada is probably America's closest ally. That's my opinion, for right or wrong. But of course, China has targeted Canada and the United States as one block, with the United States having slight preference only because a lot more things get invented here. The United States is a superpower, Canada is not. But of course, Canada is very appealing to the Chinese, especially in the form of land. If you don't believe me, just try going to Vancouver, which is just north of the border of the United States, and not far if you go into Canada from the northern part of the state of Washington, you will see that a lot of land is owned by the Chinese there. And the prices, of course, have gone up a lot real estate-wise. Just ask anybody who's tried to live there. I actually have friends from India who I used to work with at the Daily Post newspaper. I found out that our former IT guy, Banu, wonderful guy, he went ahead and lives there now with his wife in Vancouver. But of course, it's a bit pricey there because of the land. Prices have gone up because of the Chinese, and that's just the way it is. China also is leading the world, pretty much so, in populating foreign universities in the West with students. A lot of these students are spies. You might say, well, that sounds a bit McCarthyist-like to label all of them spies. Well, first of all, I'm not saying all of them are, but a lot of them are. And we're not talking about double digits. We're talking about probably thousands out of hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million, that have come here. And the reason they send them to the West is to learn from the West. But also they maintain leverage over these students by often using them as what the communists themselves would term as useful idiots. Basically, these Chinese students are in the West. The Chinese Communist Party wants certain things. So they arrange to make sure that it gets done. Method doesn't matter. What they want to do is not leave a trail, and of course they don't want to leave dead bodies. And what happens is they leverage the fact that all of the nationals that are sent abroad and just allowed with practical impunity into the United States, they have relatives back home. And of course, these students know that if they do anything wrong or don't do what the government wants, their relatives will suffer. And then there's the issue of the family name. China today, thanks with help from companies like Google, I'm not making this up, has now perfected what is essentially the world's most Orwellian, draconian social credit system. And that's how they run their society today. And after the commercial break shortly, I'll go ahead and explain how it works. I've reported on it in the news over the years, even in full-page specials that have appeared in Daily World newspaper. They're a matter of public record. We'll be back after this commercial break.
It's hard to listen to the news without realizing we're living in volatile, unprecedented times. Yet never has there been such an opportunity to transform the human condition. As old structures fail, where can we find the guidance to co-create a better way? Find Your Path Home is an ever-evolving, leading-edge information, education, and healing resource center designed to support and guide you on your path to unity and enlightenment. Based on sound principles employed by shaman worldwide, we provide techniques that can support you through the current transitions, offering online shamanic classes, international long-distance shamanic healing sessions, complimentary Mission Evolution radio episodes and Stairway to Heaven TV vignettes, seminars, retreats, and much more. All of this can be found on findyourpathhome.com.
So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me. simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
Welcome back to the second segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, we were talking about communist China and the threat that they pose to the whole world. It's not just the U.S. or Canada or only the West. They target the West disproportionately because the West has things that it wants. And China will do anything that it can get away with. Just being very blunt with you, I'm not mincing words. I'm not being politically correct because, in my opinion, being PC is another way of saying I'm being phony. I don't believe in that. Communist China is determined to literally become the world's only superpower. And you might say, well, what's the big deal with that? Everybody wants to be king of the hill. No, I don't think Switzerland wants to rule the world. They haven't had a war in, over 700 years, some commendable amount of time. No other country, I think, can say that. Israel doesn't want to take over the world. It could, let's be blunt, make Gaza a parking lot if it wanted to, but it chooses not to, even though there's a terrorist group called Hamas in Gaza that controls it illegitimately. Let's be blunt about that. We'll talk about that in another show. Back to China. China is a threat to global peace and stability, first of all, because it's communist. Let's be blunt. Has communism worked in history? No. Would you consider Cuba to be a success? Yeah, if you think that something is better than nothing, yeah. Otherwise, no, it's a dismal failure. And the only reason the communist government stays in power in Cuba is because it uses force. If it didn't use force, if it relied on a really free, open political system, it would be lucky to get any votes outside the Castro family. Now, would you consider North Korea a shining example of being a success? Well, I guess it depends on what your definition of success is. Once again, you have a government there which is propped up by communist China. It's the only reason it stays in power, because China won't let it fail. And it stays in power by force again. And the same is true for its big parent, communist China. Now let me tell you, let me start giving you some facts here as to which, in my opinion, prove what I'm saying, that China is the greatest threat to the human race today, even more so than Islamo-fascist terrorism. The reason China is the biggest threat to the human race today is because it wants to conquer the world and ultimately subdue it. And it plans to do this economically. And it's winning economically, let's be blunt. And if it doesn't do it economically, it is prepared to use military force. That is why it is modernizing its army and overall armed forces at a rate faster and greater, and spending more money proportionally than any other armed forces on the planet. The leaps it is making from where it used to be to where it will be in the near future are greater than any other military in the world. Now, what China is doing is this, and it's an outgrowth of something that they planned when the Soviet Union fell in 1991. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Chinese leadership was horrified. The first thing they were looking at was, that could happen to us. And they were determined to make sure it didn't happen to them. So they made one key change from diversifying or branching off, if you will, from the Maoist ideology. They decided to become, instead of the so-called hardcore capitalists that they had claimed to be under Mao, they changed instead to becoming totalitarian capitalists. And I mean that. Think about it. It's factually correct. They love money. They make tons of money. The second, if not the largest economy in the world now, equal to or greater than the U.S., depending on how you measure the numbers. And that's been true for a number of years, by the way. First started reporting on the fact that China had equaled or surpassed the U.S. during 2 years of the Obama presidency. And that's, again, a fact. So they love making money. Russia didn't have enough money to keep its empire going. It imploded because it was bankrupt. So what did China do that Russia just couldn't figure out, even though they had a lot of bright guys there too? Well, it's called manufacturing. You see, capitalism and companies like to make things very cheap. And they like to charge as much money as they can for a product and get away with it and still laugh all the way to the bank, if possible. They like the highest margin on that item, if possible. Or what they like to do is make things cheaply, sell them for a cheap price, but sell mass quantities of them, and that's how they make huge amounts of money. And there are different parts of the world that operate according to those models. And I'll tell you, I've seen it firsthand. I've been to 27 different countries. One of the most amazing things for me to see in Asia was how all of Asia was based on cheap prices, mass quantity. Well, mass quantity because they've got a lot of people over there, more than any other part of the world. If you combine the numbers of the populations of India and China alone, you have about 2.5 billion people just in those two countries out of a total planet-wide population of about 7 billion people. So Asia has a disproportionately high amount of people over there. So yes, things are cheap. And trust me, things are made very cheaply too. And I heard countless Indian friends of mine say, oh, don't worry, don't complain about the zipper breaking, you can always buy another backpack. Well, I don't want to buy another backpack. I want to keep the backpack I bought, even though it was a good deal, for more than a month. Hello? But no, their attitude is, no, just go buy another one. Okay, so I'd spend 2,000 rupees instead of 400, and I still have the backpack. It's been to many countries with me. It was worth the extra money. And I would point out how well made the zippers were, how thicker they were, how even the fine sand getting in between the teeth of the zipper didn't seem to bother it. I didn't have to oil the zipper as much compared to these cheap things made in China. And I had to smile over the fact that they were made in China, since India is a very cheap country economically as well, 65 or 70 rupees to the dollar. Things are inexpensive there, as a rule. For $500 salary a month, you could pretty much live like a king over there. And that's in more expensive cities like Chandigarh. Wouldn't be true in Delhi, which has always been overpriced, especially since India has been economically booming. But that is what China has done. What they have done is they cut deals with the West, especially during the Clinton years, when Bill Clinton was president. And I witnessed some of this because I had colleagues at Boeing, company I was working with or for at the time, before I left the U.S. in the year 2000 and went to Europe for 10 years, then India. So what happened was people were leaving Boeing because they were setting up shops in China, outsourcing everything from, call centers to manufacturing. There was a wave going on there. And there were these internationalists at the United Nations who, of course, helped push this. There were people like Maurice Strong, who I exposed in my book that exposed the false claims of Al Gore that came out. It was the first book I published from India. And Maurice Strong is exposed in the last part of that book. He was a friend of Mao. He was a communist, a globalist, and he used his clout at the UN to make sure that billions of dollars were shifted from the West over to Communist China. He had property there, a residence there, and of course he was a mentor of Al Gore. And what you saw during the Clinton administration, when Gore was vice president, is you had a start of a shift of money from the West to China, with enormous investments in infrastructure and manufacturing being set up so that the Chinese would begin to make goods for the West. This included countries in Europe as well. It wasn't just the U.S., but the U.S. was leading the charge. And eventually, over time, guess what happened? China was doing just a good enough job so that today, most of what you buy, most consumers, the stuff you buy is made in China or assembled in China. So it was the greed of the West that essentially made the Communist Chinese Party rich. They took that money, and yes, they did improve the quality of the lives of the Chinese people. Let's be clear on that. But at what cost? The cost was to lose basic freedoms. If you were today, even all these decades later after the Tiananmen Square massacre, to stand there on the corners of Beijing, wave an American flag, even hold a Bible up and try to talk to people about Jesus Christ, you'll get arrested. You'll absolutely be shut down as a minimum. Because now today, even the churches over there, the Christian churches, they are not allowed to display the cross. They have to display instead pictures of their great leader or the communist or Chinese flag. They have to openly sign a pledge of loyalty, an oath to the government and the great fearless leader there. Because again, they are totalitarian capitalists. Now, you have to consider a dynamic here, which is rather curious. Imagine that you are a country, the world's most powerful in the world. You're the United States of America. And you have the richest companies in the world too, especially technology companies. Now, they're going to take billions and what is really trillions of dollars, and they're going to give it to a country that wants to replace you. Not in fair competition. They'll do anything to defeat you. They not only want to defeat you, they want to subdue you. And they're going to build a military that is going to be so powerful one day that you can't stop them, and they can operate with impunity in the part of Asia that they want to, including capturing and seizing Taiwan, and you can't do anything about it. We'll talk about that after the commercial break.
They are here, and they've been here for thousands of years, making their presence known in the shadows. They might be seen by a lonely motorist on a deserted road late at night, or by a frightened and confused husband in the bedroom he is sharing with his wife. But who are they? What do they want? Why are they here? Perhaps most concerning, has the government been aware of their presence all along? The new book by rel-mar, UFO Disclosure, the 70-year cover-up exposed, delves into the world of UFOs. Can full disclosure be soon? Order now and receive a free hour and 37-minute DVD on the UFO phenomenon. UFOs are real. Get both the book and the DVD, a $40 value, for only $19.99. To order your book and DVD today, go to rel-marzulli.net. That's rel-marzulli.net.
Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Welcome back to segment 3 here on Cal's Corner radio show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. We're talking about communist China, why it's the biggest threat to the human race today. We're talking about the fact that it intends to take Taiwan, that it has used money that the West has bent over backwards to pay it over the years. When I say the West, I also mean Europe. It has taken that money. It is now building, it intends to build the world's most powerful army, or at least an army or military big enough to essentially checkmate or stalemate the U.S. military. It certainly already is on par to be equal to Russia's, meaning it can certainly hold its own against Russia. And since none of the countries want to go nuclear because they can't afford to do that, a conventional army and the ability to project standoff capabilities or standoff force is the name of the game. So think about this for a moment again. If you had a bunch of money, would you give it to somebody who eventually wants to take that money and build a military that it will eventually use to try to defeat you, or at least take a country like Taiwan or brutalize Japan? Would you pay for that? Why not just write him a check and cut to the chase? Why not just pay him off? Why drag out the pain over the years in such a way where such a nemesis becomes even more powerful globally so that there's no way you can stop them unless you literally go to war? And then the question becomes, are you going to pay that price? Right now, there are many Democrats, over 158 of them, running for president of the United States for the upcoming 2020 election. Of the 158 odd candidates that I am aware of, I saw on this list, of course, about a dozen are the so-called leading candidates. I would be asking the leading candidates this basic question: are you prepared to go to war to defend Taiwan, to keep China from conquering it? Because they're going to do it either economically if they can, or they're going to do it via military force the moment they have that ability to do it and get away with it, the moment they think it's time to pull that trigger, literally. The United States has said it will defend Taiwan, but with today's so-called leadership, who knows? Now, I think Trump would do it, but I don't know about the Democrats. Now, the reason that issue is important is because it's a litmus test of more than just the issue of Taiwan. It's an issue of what does the human race stand for? Because China has announced 3 things, and I've written full-page specials on this. There's no question it's true. China has what it calls a 2020 plan, a 2025 plan, and a 2050 plan. And the 2020 plan calls for them to retake Taiwan, or at least to have that ability. And what China has been doing is actual plans leaked out of their planned invasion As I exposed in one of these articles, it showed that they would invade Taiwan at 16 different points, overwhelming the island, doing it at such speed, using a combination of missile barrages, aircraft, and amphibious assaults, that they would establish a beachhold on the island faster than the U.S. could respond to try to stop them. They would fire 1,000 missiles at the island, and to this day, as I say this, there's at least 1,000 of these missiles pointed at Taiwan. Now that's either a good bluff or it's intent. Time will tell. The U.S., of course, has protested, and China has protested back at the UN level, over its creating artificial islands, because once it creates artificial islands, it then claims sovereignty to extend from the point of those islands as far as 200 miles. Well, once you do that, you control effectively the shipping lanes. So it's not allowed. It's not recognized by the UN. China then faked and lied about supposed archaeological evidence, proving that it always had a maritime presence in the areas it's now claiming as its territory, where it has begun making artificial islands. The UN has rejected that evidence, as has science. And of course, Chinese scientists said their evidence is credible, but of course they'll say anything because they're members of the Communist Party. They have no choice, even if they wanted to. Thank God the UN has said no. Russia is trying a similar bogus attempt over the Arctic. Canada is going to have to confront Russia over that issue, and it's going to need the support of the United States because it gives Canada a stronger hand. Now, I don't think for a moment that Canada fears Russia in the sense of I don't think that they're fearing an invasion, but just the fact that Russia would militarize the northern areas of the polar regions is worrisome. It should worry anybody who shares geographic commonality in that area, which of course is Canada, and further down, the United States. So China has a plan to be ready to take Taiwan starting in 2020. When they do it, it's up to them. They prefer to do it economically. Now, companies are forced, like Google and Apple, to remove the Taiwan flag from emojis, the keyboard set that are sold on computers in China, because China is delegitimizing Taiwan. They're taking the very idea that it's not part of one China out of everyone's mind if they can get away with it. Now let's talk about their 2025 plan. China's 2025 plan calls for it to be self-sufficient. That includes resource-wise. Now China, if you look at what they've been doing globally, they've been following this pattern. They talk about wanting to build a silk trade route all around the globe. And you say, wow, that's really cool. We can move freight even more easier among the continents in the planet and by ship and by these huge superhighways. And China will pay for it. Well, China will pay for it from the standpoint that they'll loan the money, but you've got to pay it back to them. You know, there's no such thing as a free lunch, especially from the communists. So what China does is what they're doing to Pakistan and what they're doing to Africa, is they give money on terms that they know these countries are not going to be able to afford to pay back. And the people who take the money and the bribes on the side enrich themselves, these corrupt leaders. And again, this is in Pakistan and Africa. They take this knowing they're not going to be around. They've got money in the Swiss bank accounts. They can always leave, defect, do whatever. Get away with it, in other words. So what happens is when China comes to collect on the debt, the money isn't there, they then seize that port. And that port was very strategic, not coincidentally, of course. So what you see is that China is setting up key methods and ways and means and buying the mineral rights and raw resource rights to key raw minerals and elements as well as oil, so it has no single supplier anymore, so that if things go wrong in Venezuela like they're going wrong now, it can still draw oil from Iran or Iraq, for example. China has been busted, even in the latest UN report, which was studying the issue of why were sanctions, these so-called tough sanctions, because remember, leaders like Barack Obama kept stressing how tough the sanctions are. Even Trump stresses how tough the sanctions are against North Korea. Well, sanctions are only tough when they're enforced. When they're not enforced, they might as well not exist. And that is what has happened. In this stinging UN report, which came out only about 2 weeks ago, I wrote a large article on it, quoted from it in a full-page special in Daily World newspaper. It says very clearly that China and Russia and Iran have helped North Korea violate sanctions. Now, let's talk about that for a moment. You got China in there and Russia. They're members of the UN Security Council. They pass these sanctions. And here they are, accomplices to the crimes of breaking them. Now, gee, where have we seen this before, folks? We saw it in the case of Saddam Hussein. A lot of people, especially millennials today, and I'm sorry to say Democrats, will tell me with a straight face, because they're ignorant on this issue, that George Bush unilaterally declared war against Iraq and basically gave the middle finger to the UN. Well, no, he didn't. It wasn't that simple. Remember your history and stop reading or believing everything CNN likes to tell you. George Bush tried to go through the UN. He gave the speech saying that he was going to go through it, and he paused before he said those very lines. He tried to go through the UN. He gave the UN Security Council every chance. But what happened was the U.S. government, through the NSA and CIA, had found smoking gun intelligence that France, this was the government of Jacques Chirac at the time, the government of Germany, the government of Russia, the government of China, and even Jordan, the Jordanians, were all taking bribes by Saddam Hussein to fight the sanctions. In other words, they would take the money from Saddam and fight against war, torpedoing the effort to launch a war against him, because Saddam didn't want another war. He'd know he'd lose, despite his bluster. And they were taking the money at the same time while also cynically renewing the sanctions, which, of course, ensured that there would be this cycle of more money coming. You can't make this stuff up. And we know this, folks, because the spreadsheets documenting the payments in the form of millions of barrels of oil were found and declassified, busted. And that is the reason that Bush said, I'm out of here, we'll do it on our own. We'll be back after this break.
They are here, and they've been here for thousands of years, making their presence known in the shadows. They might be seen by a lonely motorist on a deserted road late at night, or by a frightened and confused husband in the bedroom he is sharing with his wife. But who are they? What do they want? Why are they here? Perhaps most concerning, has the government been aware of their presence all along? The new book by rel-mar, UFO Disclosure, the 70-year cover-up exposed, delves into the world of UFOs. Can full disclosure be soon? Order now and receive a free hour and 37-minute DVD on the UFO phenomenon. UFOs are real. Get both the book and the DVD, a $40 value, for only $19.99. To order your book and DVD today, go to rel-marzulli.net. That's LAMARZULLI.net.
So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me.
SIMULTV.com, sonny boy.
SIMULTV.com.
SIMULTV.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
SIMULTV.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. SIMULTV.com.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. Once again, my name is Cal Korff. I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, about Communist China, again, they have these official plans. You know, communists tend to love their 5-year plans. They make a lot of hoopla out of them. And, of course, almost all of them almost always fell. And they lie about the official statistics and so on. And Communist China has been cooking its books for many years. Its growth hasn't been as stellar as the propaganda has pretended. On the other hand, you can't deny its very real growth either. So to cut to the chase here, China invokes a system that is probably the most passively aggressive as far as restrictive on this planet. They have started to use this system. It has been field tested, imposed in parts of the country now. Millions of people are under it. And what happens is it's as Orwellian can get. It's called the social credit system. And I've reported on this as a journalist from India. The way it works is this. In China, like any society, you're going to have a job, you're going to have a bank account, you may have a car, you might even have a mortgage. Surely you're going to have rent of some kind. You're going to spend money at a restaurant. You're going to maybe have insurance. You're going to pay money for your kids, your clothes, etc. Living stuff. Well, in China, the government knows where you are at all times. Their cameras have a facial recognition system. So they know when you've gone in and out of wherever. They know who you're meeting with. Little squares appear around the face identifying the person. They're color-coded. When it's red, that means there's a problem, at least in the eyes of the Communist Party. They not only know who you're with, they don't even need to see your face to know who you are. Now you might say, well, how's that possible? It's called how you walk. It's called your gait. They actually have algorithms now, thanks to companies from the West, and Google is rumored to be one of those companies. We know that it has helped China develop what it euphemistically calls its Great Firewall. This is its censored version of a search engine where certain terms are just not allowed. And when you type things on the internet in real time, you are monitored in real time by the Communist Party minions. And what happens is these algorithms analyze footage, real-time camera footage of people walking around, and based on an analysis of how they're walking, unless you change the way you walk, they can tell who you are. It's yet another so-called unique marker between individuals. So let's say that you spend too much time playing your PlayStation 2 games instead of reading the communist literature by the great leader. Let's say that you didn't do your homework that night. You didn't study the great lectures of Mao or Lenin. You instead decided that you were going to play, on Facebook or do whatever. Well, you'll start to get penalized by the government, which means the Communist Party. And your credit rating, your social credit rating, will start to go down. And what happens over time is that certain normal privileges that everybody has, that theoretically are inherent in what passes for their constitution over there, they're denied you. Meaning, all of a sudden you can't take that subway. You can't take that bus. You can't book that flight. You can't get a mortgage. You can't get a bank account anymore. You are slowly ostracized from society. And this happens on an ongoing rolling basis. So imagine everything you do is monitored, and then how you do it and what you do is rated and graded, and then you're penalized or rewarded based on what you do or don't do. And it's all done real time by the government using technology stolen and bought from the West. And it's coming to other countries near you, meaning other dictatorships. China is now looking to outsource this technology to other friendlies like dictatorships in Africa. And you better believe that this technology is also used in various forms by police departments. If you think for 1 minute that the traffic cams don't go ahead and have facial recognition on them, and they basically try to figure out who you are, well, stop being so naive, because there are absolutely systems that do it. They were not perfected in China. They were just transplanted and customized for what China wanted. So what China is trying to do is be self-sufficient in vital minerals so that it doesn't need the United States or other potential unfriendlies or enemies in the future. It can always rely on something it now owns in Africa because it essentially paid for it. It didn't do it through the front door. Well, it did officially, but wink, wink. It was set up in a way where there was no question that China would eventually become the owner and seize through legal means, leverage, liens, whatever, failure to pay your loan, wink, wink, and now it's ours. And that's exactly what China has been doing. And now we know, just like they did in the war against Saddam in the run-up to that, the same so-called custodians of, the UN Security Council, at least a couple of them are so corrupt that they take bribes not to really do their job. So what's the point of having the UN Security Council when at the end of the day, when they don't do their job deliberately, you can't do anything? What's the U.S. going to do? Declare war on Russia and China because they were taking bribes not to enforce sanctions against North Korea? No, it's not going to really do anything. Sure, it can complain. It's done that. It can expose it. Well, you can Google articles and UN reports that condemn this. But at the end of the day, condemnation means nothing if nothing is done. What's the point? You shouldn't praise it. You can condemn it on principle. But at the end of the day, the problem continues. It does not get better. So China has a plan at that point, after they become self-sufficient, to then eventually, by the year 2050, that is their open stated goal, to replace the United States as the world's only economic and military superpower. And what they mean by that is they don't intend to nuke the United States and destroy it. They would end up destroying themselves, the whole planet. They're not going to do that. Hard to make money when there's no one around to buy your things you make or pay you to make them. But what it will do is become such an economic giant that the United States basically is surrounded by so many different means that other than intellectual property, which is becoming rapidly the last and final frontier, China will eventually beat the West and the rest of the world in every other game. Because there's another component that's very critical to this that is often underestimated. And it's summed up with one word: babies. When you have a country that's 1.25 million or billion people versus a country that's 300 million, economically, the scale of economics, you can't compare them. And believe me, I have a firsthand appreciation for this. I remember seeing outside Delhi, in the so-called New Delhi areas, these massive construction projects of what would be 100,000 homes at a time, as in apartments, huge blocks of them, reminiscent of what I saw in the Czech Republic after communism fell, these big blocks of socialist housing built by Stalin, the so-called Panelaks that went on for miles. Well, I saw them also in India, only they were being built by the Modi government, and before that, the Congress Party there, before it fell. And what happened is they told me there's going to be 100,000 families put in there. And of course, families have more than one member. Huge construction projects that the West just doesn't have anywhere near on this scale. And yet they're going on in Asia. Because in India, for example, they're about to pass China in total population. China has now lifted the one-child limit because they know at the end of the day they have to keep the population going. So what I saw in India was a lot of cheap stuff, but they sold huge quantities of it, and that was the only way they could make a living. If they didn't sell huge quantities, they couldn't eat. Where here in the U.S., we have things that are a lot more expensive. We don't have to sell as many quantities, yet things are more expensive here, and yet companies still make record profits. So it's a very different business model. So if China were a nation that stood for human rights, human dignity, freedom of speech, all that good stuff, it would be great to welcome them as maybe even being the world superpower or second, whatever. But they're not. They are everything the human race doesn't want to be going forward and should never devolve to. But not enough people care. Worse, even more, don't even realize this. And there's no excuse for it, because this information isn't secret. Now, I don't profess to be an expert on this stuff, but I've written probably a few hundred different items on China over the years, and I've followed it as a reporter, because as a human being, I take this threat very seriously, and I try to warn a lot of people, and the looks on their faces, I don't even know how to describe them, because they don't even know what to think about this issue. It's not first and foremost on the agenda of CNN or the liberal networks. They don't even really talk about this issue. Instead, it's always Russia. Well, they need to wake up to the new reality that's been true for a long time now, ever since the Soviet Union fell. Duh, hello. Millennials who can't even tell you what the Cold War was, let alone they don't have a memory of it. They weren't alive. It's not their fault. But the ignorance is inexcusable. So China is the real threat. And going forward, it is going to be the rise of Asia this century, and the West better be prepared to handle it properly. We'll be back next week.
If you are looking for a safe, zero-calorie natural option to the harmful artificial sweeteners on the market today, Just Like Sugar is what you're looking for. Just Like Sugar is a wonderful natural alternative for those health-conscious people who choose a calorie-restricted diet with a great, pure, sweet flavor that tastes just like sugar. Just Like Sugar is a great natural option for people suffering from diabetes and may be useful in restricted diet programs where standard sugars are not allowed and does not cause a laxative effect of some other sweeteners. Just Like Sugar comprises a perfect blend of chicory root fiber, natural calcium, natural vitamin C, and Just Like Sugar's sweetness comes from the natural flavors from the peel of the orange. Just Like Sugar is a natural alternative to harmful artificial sweeteners and will change the way that you believe all natural sweetener products taste. Just Like Sugar is available at your local Whole Foods markets, Wild Oats markets, Henry's, Sun Harvest, and many other fine natural food stores in the U.S., Canada, and worldwide.
They are here, and they've been here for thousands of years, making their presence known in the shadows. They might be seen by a lonely motorist on a deserted road late at night, or by a frightened and confused husband in the bedroom he is sharing with his wife. But who are they? What do they want? Why are they here? Perhaps most concerning, has the government been aware of their presence all along? The new book by Eli Marzulli, UFO Disclosure, the 70-year cover-up exposed, delves into the world of UFOs. Can full disclosure be soon? Order now and receive a free hour and 37-minute DVD on the UFO phenomenon. UFOs are real. Get both the book and the DVD, a $40 value, for only $19.99. To order your book and DVD today, go to lamarzulli.net. That's LAMARZULLI.net.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. SimulTV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. SimulTV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have SimulTV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.